There is an insanely clever phishing and email scam going around where the scammers were actually able to basically have Google themselves send out the scam email. And it actually comes from Google. No reply at accounts.google.com. There's one Twitter user who posted about this when he got it. It was actually a while ago. I'm kind of late to the game on this, but I thought it was important because even though Google is apparently going to be working on a fix for this, the technique that scammers used can be used in the future too. But basically the user describes how he got this email that says a subpoena was served on Google LLC requiring us to produce a copy of your Google account content and all this stuff. And it has a link to a supposed Google support case. And when you open it up, it goes to kind of a legitimate looking website that really looks like something Google would have made. It's with that same style. And it has a view case button that of course takes you to a fake login prompt, and that also looks just like the Google login, and it steals your info. But the tricky thing is they didn't really spoof the from address. If you look at it, it does say from, no reply at accounts.google.com, and unless you were looking really closely or knew what to look for, this whole thing might look legitimate. And even if you were to look at the headers and the usual thing that talks about the verifications like SPF, DKIM, and DMARC, if you're familiar with those, yes, it actually did pass all of those, which is actually one of the first things I would have tried to look at. That would have really thrown me off if I was suspicious of the email. So how did the scammers do this? Well, they basically used two different strategies. One is that they hosted the scam site on sites.google.com. And if you're not familiar with that, it is where Google lets users just host their own websites on the sites.google.com domain. So if you didn't know that anyone could make a sites.google.com page, then you might think that it was actually Google hosting that site. And the other one was how they actually sent the email, which is way more sophisticated. I'll give a simpler explanation in a second, but they used something called a DKIM Replay. The checks that I mentioned before, SPF, DKIM, DMARC, I'm not going to get into those, but a big part of the verifications that are done on incoming emails is to ensure that the content of the email itself has not been changed at all. So that will usually include the from address and of course the body of the email itself. But there's other parts that are not verified by this. So here's a really convoluted, admittedly, analogy, but try to bear with me. Imagine that there's a machine that can magically determine whether or not a letter on a piece of paper has a signature and whether that signature was actually signed by the person who they claim to be, not just someone forging it or, someone pretending to have the same name, and then also can ensure that the text of the letter was not changed in any way. Then imagine that there's a scammer who is able to somehow acquire a letter that was sent by the government and signed by a judge, but it was meant to be sent to some criminal. And the letter says stuff like, "Hello, criminal scum, you're in big trouble, you're going to jail." Imagine the letter itself doesn't necessarily contain like the specific name of the person it's supposed to go to. That would just be on the outer envelope. I know it's not realistic, it'll make more sense later. But importantly, they take the letter out of the original envelope and put it in a new envelope that is addressed to you. And then the scammer walks up to you and says, "I'm an undercover police officer and you're in big trouble. Here's a letter to prove it. Either pay a fine or give me your login details or you're going to jail, mister." So you take the letter out of the envelope and then read it and take it to the magic machine, and it really was signed by a judge, and it says you're a criminal scum and all this, and so you better just give the guy what he wants. But in reality, what happened was the letter was real, but the envelope was fake. That is sort of what happened. Not exactly. The body of the email is like the letter, and then some of the headers is like the envelope. But again, it's not like they just spoofed the to address and the from address. That was, from my understanding, part of the original one that was verified too. So what that means, in other words, is that Google themselves at some point really did send an email to someone that contained all this text about there was a subpoena and go to this address and you have to fill in your info, all this stuff. It actually sent an email that said this from accounts.google.com. So how did that happen and why does the scammer have it? Well, you see, Google lets developers and really anyone create apps that interact with their API, and you register the apps. And when you do that, you give the app a name. And the name is so that when someone goes to authorize the app for their account, they can be prompted, do you want to give access or you gave access to this app name so people know what it is. And also relevantly, they'll often send a security alert after you do this saying you granted access to this app name on your account. And if you didn't do it, then, there's steps you can take. So what the scammers did was created an app themselves where the name of the app was this entire block of texts with all the new lines, all the spaces, all this crap in it was like literally just the name field in the app they registered. Then they registered a domain at this big complicated thing that is not associated with Google. And they said that their email address was me at this big domain. And they made a Google account with that address and then authorized the app that they made with that Google account, which means that Google then sent a confirmation email. You granted this big long app name access to your account. And indeed, if you scroll down all the way on the scam email, that's exactly what it says. But there's another layer to this because, wait a minute, okay, so they got Google to send themselves an email that said all this. How is that useful? How did it end up in the victim's mailbox? Well, that's where the whole DKIM Replay thing comes in. Basically, they were able to go to certain forwarding services where they say, actually, deliver this email to this person, and they'll just kind of do it, even if it isn't technically the to address for the email. I'm not super familiar with how that works, but you'll notice that the to address of the email received is not the address of the person who got it. Now, that can also be possible if it was like a CC or BCC email, but that is not the case. This email was meant for someone else, and it actually shows that in the to address. And that's why they used the me at their big long domain, was because usually if Google sees an email coming to you, they just put me as shorthand. So it says that. But it's because the first name in the email address is literally me, not because it means you, me. Anyway, the reason that all the verification checks pass is because it looked at the to address and the from address and the body of the email, and it's like, well, all this matches up. None of it was changed. Must be legit. But the one thing that they looked over was, wait a minute, is this mailbox this is going into actually the person who's supposed to be receiving this email? Which you would think is kind of an important thing. Now, if you knew what to look for, there would be some clues that this was not a legitimate email. Most of it in the little drop down that shows info about the email. Like, for example, again, the to address is not to the person who received it. Now, again, that could be possible if you were in the BCC, blind carbon copy, or CC. That could also send it to you. But in this case, it was none of that. The other thing was that it went to a sites.google.com address for the website that it told you to go to, which now that you know, can just be created by anyone. So that's sketchy as well. Google, from my understanding, does not use it for anything themselves. Certainly not anything serious. You'll also notice that even though it says it was signed by accounts.google.com, the mailed by thing is this private email random website. So that's another sign. Wait a minute, so Google's sending it, but they didn't use their own thing. But I guess you might figure, well, maybe just Google uses that as some back-end thing, but it is a sketchy sign. And it's actually kind of crazy because the Twitter user who received this first and talked about it said that he reported it to Google, and they originally said that, oh, working as intended, it's not a bug. But then, of course, after it got a bunch of media attention, then they're like, oh, all right, we're going to patch it. And I believe they said that they were going to be rolling it out soon and probably have mostly. So by the time you watch this, I would think that they would have fixed it. But again, this could be used in the future, and it might not necessarily be from Google. It could be used by other services. So hopefully Google will somehow add a fix that will make it a universal fix where, it couldn't be tricked and created from Microsoft or anything else. But in any case, now, even if it says the from address and it seems legit, you just can't trust literally anything these days. Anyway, I would be curious to know if you guys got this email, or would you have fallen for it if you did? We can talk about that down in the comments. And of course, if you enjoyed the video, be sure to give it a big, giant, huge thumbs up. It helps out. And if you want to subscribe, I try to make videos about twice a week, so it should be worth it. If you want to keep watching, the next video I'd recommend is where I talked a long time ago about the ultimate guide to detecting spoofed emails. For the most part, that covers everything. So if you watch that and you also saw this one, you'll be even more secure than ever. Highly recommend it. So I'll put that link right there and click on. So thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.